bad decision and lay down with a lame, you can't go back and unring that bell. But you got what you got. And so if you have a child who you want to be successful, you have to surround him with men who want him to be successful as well.
And I also think too, we need to glorify the men that are handling their business. I think that's a big part of the problem. Because we're only glorifying the negativity. If I always been programmed with your dad ain't, your uncle ain't, what about the ones that's doing something? I want to glorify those ones that are actually taking care of their business. Because that's what the men want, that's what we're going to want to be. My grandfather wanted something out of life. And my grandmother praised him. Oh, that's Big Dad. He the one sent me to school on his Social Security check. I went to St. Monica. I had to walk from the project with my little Catholic school uniform on that my grandfather spent his Social Security check, that I want to glorify him, even though he's not here right now. That saved my life.
Let me ask a question. Hang on one second. Let me ask a question of Mayor Landrieu, because I think this is setting up sort of what's happening here in New Orleans. I remember having a conversation early on in some of our reporting around Hurricane Katrina. And the president of Xavier said something that I thought at the time was kind of crazy. He said the silver lining in this terrible catastrophe for the city is that the schools have been destroyed. And there's an opportunity. And I was thinking, like, you're walking around in really some of the worst damage and destruction. And he's talking about a silver lining. And of course, he's a renowned educator himself, Dr. Francis. When you look and hear these stories and think in terms of how best to save our sons and how to create that atmosphere of great self-esteem, what's the city doing successfully that's working?
Well, first of all, P and I grew up in the same neighborhood. P, where you went to school at? What grammar school did you go to?
I went to Chester Elementary School.
Yeah, I went to St.
Chester. And I went to St. Monica.
St. Monica.
Yeah, and I went to
St. Matthias right down the street.
Yeah.
So back to Dr. Perry, we all look different, but we all grew up in the same neighborhood. I grew up in the 13th Ward, 12, 13, right on General Pershing and Priya Street, in the neighborhood, right? And so back to what Dr. Perry said, you look at P and you look at these gentlemen up here. I mean, I don't mean to short y'all or me, but if we can make it,
yeah.
I mean, you know, you got to think about this for a second. And so, Soledad, to answer your question, first of all, I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be with all of you. And again, thankful to Essence for giving us the opportunity to talk about this subject and to have this panel. It took a lot of courage for Michelle and Joy and those folks to say, let's talk about this, because as Judy Reese-Morse, my chief of staff and deputy mayor, said, you can't go around this. You can't go under it. You can't go over it. You got to go through it. And I would say just a couple of things that are just important, and I'll get to the institutional changes. Number one, the older I get, and I'm 52 now, the less I know. When I was young, I knew everything. And I wasn't afraid to tell everybody. But there are a couple of very important things I know about this problem. Number one, it hasn't always been in America where young African-American men who knew each other were shooting young African-American men in the head. That has not always been. And since I know that, I also know it doesn't always have to be that way. That's the second thing I know. The third thing I know is that African-American boys and men are critical to the future of America, and America will never, ever attain that aspiration of a more perfect union until we fix this problem. And the fourth thing I know is that there is an answer, and we have to be the ones, now that we accept all of those things, that this catastrophic event is taking place every day. So I want to just put a little pain on you, all right? We talked a little bit about the Martin case on CNN. We talked about Newtown. We talked about Columbine. We talked about all those other issues. And Soledad, you talked about the ebb and flow of people's attention span. Just Sunday night, down the street, a little 14-year-old boy sitting on his stoop. Another man, 31 years old, walks up to him and shot him in the head. The 14-year-old little boy was the target. And the 31-year-old was mad at him. Now, without going into all of the details, we have reason to believe that it was something as silly as an argument over a frozen pop. Now, that event is replaying itself every day on the streets. And to the comments of the panelists, I think what you heard people say, you heard some people say, you gotta have faith. And you gotta believe in God. That's important. The church is important here. It has about babies having babies. That's important. It's about the institutions and the schools. It's about neighborhoods and families. It's about all of it, right? But at the end of the day, I think what we have to recognize is that somehow, without us running everybody off by pointing our finger saying it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault, we can kind of skate by that by saying, look, it may not be everybody's fault, but it's all of our responsibility right now to not look back, but to look forward and to fix the problem. So, if you kind of think about it from this perspective, we have developed, and I'm going to use the word culture. Don't none of y'all throw me out of here. Mama Patrina, wherever you are, I love the Mardi Gras Indians. I love Mardi Gras. I love red beans and rice. I love jazz. I love all of our culture from that perspective. But if you think about what culture is behavioral patterns that have developed over time that have produced either music or food or murder. And I'm telling you that we have developed a culture of violence for a whole bunch of different reasons. And what we ought to do as a people is think about what we have done since 1980, good, bad, and different, that has created the environment where these young men, more the rule than the exception, right, are finding themselves in a position where they're making the decisions to hurt each other and really to just kind of take the community in a direction they don't want to go in. And so every one of the institutions needs to be rebuilt. The church needs to be rebuilt. The family has to be rebuilt. Personal responsibility. At the end of the day, we can talk about, and I believe in background checks, and I believe in everything we're talking about, the president's agenda on that issue. But there's also an element of, like the doctor said, I'm not getting in that car. And P said, I'm not showing up at 8:30. And decisions, and giving them the strength to make those decisions. And so what we're trying to do, and I'm going to say I'm just the mayor, right? But I'm one of a whole bunch of people in the educational institution, mom and dad, they got to get the schools right. Our kids got to show up at school. They got to study hard. They got to have good teachers. They have to have enrichment programs. You have to show them a pathway out of where they are right now. There's got to be good job training. There's got to be a connection between the training and the job. There's got to be a whole community that hugs you and holds you and says to you, because you know anybody that's got kids knows this, what your job is to form that child, right? That means they're not formed. And they're going to move in a direction where you need to move them in, which means that if it's not a mama or it's not a daddy, it's got to be a teacher, it's got to be a pastor, it's got to be a family. The entire community has to make this thing happen, because government alone, even though we got a big role to play here, is not going to do it alone. The education system's not going to do it alone. The pastor's not going to do it alone. The coach is not going to do it alone. And nobody's going to do it at all. Nobody's even going to show up to the game if we don't stand up and declare that, number one, there's a problem. Number one, young black men and black boys are important. And number three, we do not accept the level of murder on the streets of America. Unless we just do those simple things first, nothing else is going to follow.
Mr. Mayor, I thank you, Devon, as well. Thank you for being with us. Amir, Master P, Steve Perry, thank you. Thanks very much. We appreciate you being part of our panel.